Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Catholic Talk Show. We got a great show for you today. We're going to be looking at the 12 astounding facts about the Shroud of Turin today.
Yeah, we're going to get into the science, we're going to get into the history, and we're going to really dig into just amazing things that lend credence to the fact that the Shroud of Turin is the actual burial cloth of Jesus Christ himself.
Think about that. A linen 2,000 years ago with the imprint of God in the person of Jesus Christ. Powerful.
Amazing.
All right, man. Great to be back in the studio with you guys. As always, we have Father Rich Pagano.
What up?
And Ryan Shield.
Ryan, Father.
Ryan.
Father.
Right.
What a phenomenal day today. It's gorgeous. We're here at the Cast Media Studios in LA and Hollywood, and it's a just gorgeous, gorgeous day. It's been fun to produce these things with you, and it's good to be back.
Yeah, we got a really cool show today.
Yeah, this is an episode that our listeners have really been asking for.
Right.
This is the number one most requested episode of the Catholic Talk Show that when we ask, they say, let's really get into the Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin is without doubt the most fascinating single object probably on the face of the earth. It's the most famous and most mind-boggling relic because it really shows, if it is true, that it is an actual artifact of the most important moment in all of creation and all of history. And it is a testament to everything that God's plan for human beings in its fulfillment. And it is captured in one image that is so powerful.
It really is.
And the more, time that's gone by, the more studies that's been done, the more amazing things that we find out about it that just kind of drive you into this wonder and awe.
In the spirit of that same wonder and awe, I think of the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Both the shroud and the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe just developed such a fascination. So I've really been looking forward to this show in specific and really looking at each of these astounding, facts about the shroud. And it's amazing. So let's go into it, man.
Yeah.
So a little backstory on the Shroud of Turin. Everyone probably knows what the Shroud of Turin, but actually the historical provenance of the Shroud of Turin is probably something that most people don't really realize. Now, the Shroud of Turin first entered into the historical record in the mid 14th century, around 1350, in the possession of a French knight and nobleman named Geoffroy de Charnay. Now, Geoffroy de Charnay was a very wealthy and well-to-do knight, and this is not too long after the Crusades. And most shroud historians and would say that the Shroud of Turin found its way into Western history after the sack of Constantinople. So that it was likely that this was one of the relics that was in maybe the Hagia Sophia or one of the Constantinople shrines, because they really did have...
Yeah, maybe something that Helena, Saint Helena probably
brought
sourced.
back, and brought back to her son's city, right?
Yeah.
You're going to see that if you look at relics, there is, after the Crusades, there's a huge boom in relics because when they sacked Constantinople, they took all of these back. And Constantinople really was where most of the major relics of our Lord's life and the early saints were at. So it appears in the historical record right around 1350s. It was then bought by the House of Savoy. The House of Savoy was like a royal dynasty that would eventually lead to a lot of the kings and rulers of Italy. And then it ultimately found its way into the cathedral in the northern Italian city of Turin. And that's why it's now known as the Shroud of Turin. So it has a little bit of a meandering history, likely from the Byzantine Constantinople, and then into France, and ultimately into northern Italy.
Recently, it seems to have gotten more. I mean, like in the last 40 or 50 years.
Well, I think there was two displays. Like they actually revealed the shroud, and they unveiled it because it's like in a lockbox in Turin in St. John the Baptist. Like they never bring this out. And it's a great treasure, you know, and it's been analyzed and scientifically evaluated, but they hold it up for display, you know, every now and then on very special occasions. And back in 2000, and I think it was like 2014.
Yeah, maybe it's been displayed 4 times in the last.
And like it draws
years.
Millions of people, like millions of people have gone to see. And
people wait in line for 24 to 40 hours just to walk past it for 30 seconds.
Yeah,
I would too.
Why do they? Why don't they? Why isn't like Our Lady of Guadalupe? I mean, she's up there in the shrine.
It's more delicate. It's they don't have a great display system. The security just isn't the same. So it's really a function of preservation.
I think Italians have something to do with it too.
Yeah,
just put it back in the box. But it's gonna get in the pizza.
It also gives that scarcity, so that when it does come out, it really is a very extraordinary event in generations. It's a generational thing to get that opportunity.
It's like the holy doors, you know, you think of when the doors in Rome at the Vatican are open, it's a significant thing, you know, when the, you know, remains of Pier Giorgio Frassati, for example, for a World Youth Day, or John Paul II himself for a World Youth Day, you know, they bring the relics and they you know, allow people to venerate. It just marks something significant. Yeah. Even the use of incense in the liturgy, it's, you know, it's so that it's a significant thing. So it's a significant celebration of a solemnity. Why not use some incense and do some more? You know, like I look at the way that it's been unveiled and it's been shown. You know, it kind of creates an anticipation. Yeah. What's that in Oberauergau? I can never say that town, but the Passion, they do like Oberauergau or something like that.
You two gold chain wearing fools are going to know Italian towns better than me.
But they every 10 years they do a Passion play, you know, in this town. And you know, it's such an awesome experience culturally, and people anticipated for 10 years to go see it. You know, so it's cool.
So it appears in the historical record around 1350. Now, before that, there isn't a defined provenance, but besides, they said it probably disappeared from Constantinople in 1204. Now, there's some historical things that you can do to track it back to show that it is around longer than that.
Sorry, guys. I was trying to turn my notifications off my phone. And
that's all right. Well, that's okay, Ryan.
All right.
Did you get any good notifications?
No, I was just turning it off.
Jesus just texted him and said, stay on focus, right?
I was doing it for you guys.
That's right. So there's a codex called the Prayer Codex, or the Hungarian Prayer Codex. And this codex was written in the very late 12th century, so the 1190s, which predates the historical, factual provenance of the shroud. And in this codex, there's an image that shows the burial cloth of Jesus. And it has very distinct markings on it that no artist would just randomly put in there. It has holes the shape of L's on it, which, why would those be on there? Why would they just artistically choose to do that? It also had a very distinct pattern. And these things are exactly in accordance with the actual Shroud of Turin, so that no artist would just do that. So it's very likely that this artist in the late 12th century, before the fall of Constantinople, had seen this relic and done a first in-person drawing of it. Now, even going back a little bit further, there was a historian who studied the Shroud of Turin, and his name was Vignon. And he started studying Byzantine depictions of Jesus after the 5th century. And he found some very bizarre patterns. These patterns of the way that icons of Jesus were drawn had very peculiar, distinct ways to draw Jesus. Well, if it's an icon, actually to write the icon. But things like the left eye was slightly higher than the right eye. There was a square-shaped marking at the brow of the nose, at the bridge of the nose. There was a forked beard. There was always a few strands, 3 strands of hair at the middle part of the hair. And there's 20 of these different markings, and they're called, after his research, they're known as the Vignon markings. And he found that all of these things were consistent in Byzantine art from the 5th century on, which is in accordance with when it would have, according to the theory, been displayed after St. Helena found it. So the theory is that all of these things are also consistent with the Shroud of Turin, so that these sacred icon writers would have known the Shroud of Turin, and in all of their depictions of our Lord would have put these very idiosyncratic markings into all of their pictures.
That they took from
the Shroud of Turin. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we talked about that on another episode, how artwork began, by representing gods of Roman culture, Constantinople, whatever, and how that developed into the actual face of Christ.
Yeah, but this one is, these artists would have seen the Shroud of Turin and these peculiarities and would have said, well, this is obviously what Jesus looked like. So they copied it. And there's no reason they would put a square shape on the brow of the bridge and 3 hairs and the left eye larger and a cleft beard. And if you look at hundreds of Byzantine artwork of that era, they're all consistent. So that helps to prove that. It's one of the things that helps to prove the provenance of the Shroud of Turin back to Constantinople to at least the 5th century.
Yeah.
Now, one more thing before we get...
Was that an astounding fact? Was that one of ours?
Pretty astounding. That was pretty astounding.
It is.
Now, another thing is the Sudarium of Oviedo. Now, the Sudarium of Oviedo, have you ever heard of this, Padre?
No.
So it is Latin, the Sudarium means the sweat cloth. Mm-hmm. Now, in Scripture, in the Gospel of John, when Peter runs into the tomb and finds the empty tomb, they're very specific. This is a very peculiar thing. They're very specific about what he found in there. And it says, John 20:6-7, when Simon Peter arrived after him, being John, he went in the tomb and saw the burial cloths there. And the cloth that had covered his head, not with the burial cloths, rolled up in a separate place. 2 distinct pieces of burial linens. Yeah. One, the wrappings, the other, the one that had covered his head. That is the Sudarium, tradition says. Now, the Sudarium has a known provenance all the way back to the 5th century in Spain. Now, why is this important? It's important because the Sudarium has a known provenance, and the markings of the blood are 100% consistent with the markings of the blood of the head of the Shroud of Turin. Same blood type, same cloth type, and the blood markings are like if you put 2 pieces of clear paper over them, they line up exactly. So these are things that help to prove that the Shroud of Turin existed and was known before it appears in the historical record in 13th century France.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Those are astounding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Pretty darn cool.
Yeah.
All right. So when you think of the Shroud of Turin, what is the first, how does it appear in your head? Do you think of the dull cloth with the very ghostly image, or do you see
I see the ghostly, I see the supernatural side of Christ.
So we were talking about how they had displayed it. In 1898, I think it was, there was an Italian photographer called Secondo Pio. Now, Secondo Pio, and during one of these public displays of the Shroud of Turin, he was given permission to photograph it. It was the first time photography had ever been allowed in the Shroud of Turin. And up until this point, had been displayed for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But it was always just this very faint kind of outline, barely there image. But when he developed the film, and the first time it was ever taken, it blew his mind. Because when photographs back at the time, they were produced negatives. And when he was developing the film, the negatives brought the image to life in an insanely distinct way that would have never been seen by human eyes before.
Very visible.
Right.
Yeah. It was very... Yeah, it's the one that we see now.
Right.
I mean, that's the image that most people see when they're in the Google machines.
In the Google bots. That's
you
it.
know? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the...
So, and then this really, I think, is the moment where the modern study of the Shroud of Turin takes a turn from just having been not a curiosity, but a devotional, to the point where people are like, there's something...
Miracle.
Scientifically bizarre about this. Because it was a 3D... negative image, and no one had ever really considered that. A medieval forger would have made a negative 3D image.
So before that, the veneration of this cloth of the shroud, you don't see that. So it's not even present. So now this image miraculously comes forth from it, in this photograph, and now all these wheels start in motion. in modern history to study it.
That was the moment where the scientific study of it was like, we got to look at it. We got to dig into this a little bit more. It's not just, these little Catholic Italian nonas going there and be like,
you put the shroud in the box. We'll pull it out a little later.
Have you ever been to Turin, Father?
No.
I thought you'd been all over Italy.
I have, but not to Torino. But I would love to go.
Is that near Venice and Trent and all that of the north?
No, it's in the northeast.
Northeast,
yeah. And
that's
Venice is northwest.
Okay.
Yeah. So
amazing.
It is amazing. Now, so we get to that and people start very scientifically studying it. And that image opened it up. Now, in the 80s, do you remember this when they did or have you ever heard about this when they let the Vatican allowed scientists to study the Shroud of Turin?
I do remember that.
Yeah. And it was big news that the Shroud of Turin was proven to be a hoax because of carbon-14 dating.
Yeah, which is not even used anymore now, right? I mean,
carbon-14 dating is still used. So,
and didn't they evaluate a patch on the actual shroud that dated it to the 14th century or something like that?
Yeah. So their dated it between the 1280s and the 1460s. Now, carbon-14, how that works is carbon-14 is a particular molecule of carbon, and it decays at a known rate, and it is extant in all living things. So by the rate of the decay, when you study carbon-14, you can say at the moment that it stopped being living or it was harvested or died, carbon-14 starts decaying, and then you just basically reverse engineer and get back into that number.
Into the age of it.
Now, the Shroud of Turin's pretty beat up, right? In the 1500s or so, there's
a fire.
There was a fire, and it was kept in a silver reliquary, and the silver melted and dropped little drops of silver, and it burnt through the Shroud of Turin. So all the little good nuns there who were so good at sewing patched it up, right? And they were so good at it, they didn't just sew it on, they grafted it onto the weave. So when they did the carbon-14 deities for the Sturt project in the 80s,
don't you just wish to have those Italian nuns in your parish,
in your life?
You know, there was a altar cloth and a what's it called, an alb that was made out of pure linen, and it was just one piece of cloth, and that was actually what I celebrated my first mass with, and it was prepared by the sisters, and then distributed by Archbishop Hurley 60 years ago or whatever. And but linen's just such an impressive fabric.
Yeah,
it's the fabric of our lives,
and it's the fabric. It's the fabric of Jesus's burial cloth. That. That's just fascinating to me that it was almost mandated for many years that that's what a priest would wear, would be a linen alb, and it's a baptismal garment. That's why priests wear it, but the sense of what that means in relationship to the Shroud of Turin and the shroud, the burial cloths of Jesus, and how we were called to die to ourselves.
Yeah.
It's a neat little connection.
Yeah. So when they analyzed it, these sweet little nuns had fixed up the shroud, and when they pulled the fibers from it to do the carbon-14 dating, they had pulled the fibers from where these nuns had fixed it, and obviously those fibers would have come from that time period, which would have thrown off the carbon-14 dating. Because you can't just go chopping up the shroud in the middle, so you take it from the edges. Well, the edges were the damaged area. So that threw into doubt the veracity of the carbon-14 dating. Now, in 2013, they did another study using more advanced techniques that had developed, and that's called spectroscopy. Now, spectroscopy
sounds like something they do for surgery. Spectroscopy. You know what you need? You need a spectroscopy, son.
Yeah, son, you done tore up your knee. We're going to do a spectroscopy of your knee.
On your face.
On your face. So spectroscopy, it analyzes the interaction with electromagnetic radiation, okay? And then it uses that to properly date something. Now, this was done by Padua University, the engineering department, by a professor, Giulio Fanti. And his spectroscopic analysis, which is available, you can go to livescience.com and you can read this actual study, dated the Shroud of Turin from 280 BC to 220 AD, within that range, which the bell curve would have put it directly at the time of our Lord, which would have been the 30s. Mm-hmm. Not the 1930s, the actual 30s, the 030s, which is, so that was the big thing that people said, well, this is false. But by doing that and really looking at it and properly dating it with new techniques and not flawed data samples, that really did open back up to the door that this really is a verifiable, or at least it removed the doubt from that bad dating technique.
Yeah, and this is over the course of several years.
That's right.
You know, from taking the picture, and you know, things move slow scientifically through the Vatican is what I've seen on some of the
dinosaur, right?
Things that they look at.
Yeah.
Have you guys been to the Holy Sepulchre?
Yeah,
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
I was there with my wife on my 10th anniversary.
I love that stone, like that marble stone that you walk into.
The anointing stone?
Yeah, the anointing stone.
Oh,
And
man.
I took my scarf and I just wiped my scarf all over the oils, and it still smells like it. It's been years.
Yeah, I was there for a Byzantine rite thing, and these guys were like jumping around, and they got swinging the huge incensers. I mean, it was like 10 feet long, you know.
And then they have these processions, and then they go
jump
into
on
the
rock.
tomb. Yeah,
you know, there's
so
like
amazing.
boom, you know, it was really cool.
What did you guys feel there?
The feeling, I mean, just it's one of the
tomb.
most solemn places that I've ever been.
Yeah.
And it's, even though there's a ton of people, it feels like it's
Crazy.
quiet.
Yeah,
You know, and it's not, but there's like a certain sense of, you know, like silent awe, and the inspiration value of being in that space is overwhelming.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever been in a place, you know, when you go into St. Peter's Square and you're looking around, it's like, oh my gosh, sensory overload. This is beautiful. And you're touched all throughout, you know, Europe with these beautiful churches and architectures that inspire, you know, like thoughts of God and his kingdom and the magnificence of it all. But there's nothing that communicates a greater power of solemnity and presence than right there at the tomb.
yeah.
In the Holy Sepulchre.
We woke up. This is a good hack for people that are going to the Holy Land. But we woke up at like 4:30.
Hack the Holy Land with Ryan Delacroix.
I'm big on life hacks. You
are.
So we went at like 4:30 in the morning.
best time to go.
And it was very quiet, and it was beautiful. Because that place gets crazy.
Oh, it does.
Crazy busy.
And then did you go all the way down the stairs where St. Helen discovered the cross and that
Yeah.
little area of prayer? That's probably next to the tomb area. It's a nice little quiet corner that I love to spend time in.
Yeah, and then there's the rocks of Calvary. You know,
Actually,
where
there was a
it's
priest who
crucified.
heard my confession in that adoration chapel. He was like, I was like, hey man, would you mind hearing my confession? He's like, yeah, come on back. And he took me back in the back, you know,
Parts of the
yeah,
church,
back
yeah.
parts of the church and the rectory area and where priests live. And then he took me all the way downstairs and showed me where like this place is boarded up and nobody can go down there, but there's like a whole nother access to the tomb area that, you know, was boarded up for hundreds of years or whatever.
So the Holy Sepulchre is in kind of rough shape. It's a very, very ancient structure. But while you were there, I'm sure you noticed that it was a little beat up. But did you also notice any maybe electromagnetic pulses coming from there? I don't know if you're sensitive to that or not.
The hairs of my soap opera beard were just sticking out a little bit. Like,
So the Holy Sepulchre was in need of some serious repairs. So within the last 5 years, there's been a big program to repair it.
Yeah.
Now, as part of this, they actually opened the tomb. They pulled open the marble slab.
That's right.
For the first time in centuries.
Yeah, I saw that.
Now, they took this, scientists doing this restoration work took this opportunity to take all kinds of scientific readings. And one of them, they took electromagnetic readings, again, in line with that spectroscopic with the shroud, but they also took electromagnetic readings of the burial site, of the actual tomb. And they found all sorts of electromagnetic disturbances and variances that are just
Not normal.
they're like, hey, Ray, we got a reading here, man. This is the, what's going on here, right? So, and this
got
again,
a live one.
we got a live one. So again, this science is all available if you go out and research it. All the science in these studies are there. But they found that the instruments were really just whacked out with this electromagnetic readings. And again, this is in line with the preeminent theory of the creation of the image on the shroud of the Shroud of Turin. And this is a very astounding fact. All of these was that it took a UV explosion of light that lasted for less than a millisecond, but was so powerful, it was more powerful than any light source ever created in the history of humankind times billions. this UV light would have been somewhere around 40 billion watts for 1 millisecond.
Poof. Wow.
I mean, think of your light bulb, which is maybe 40 watts, and then do that times a billion. It's a billion times brighter than a light bulb.
I'm thinking like, is this a physical miracle that wasn't necessarily like a physical reality? It was maybe imposed into well, I mean, if you look at it, I mean, they say that it would have taken a light source to shine for 1 millisecond of 40 billion watts. So I think you can infer from that was the moment of the resurrection. Right.
That light exploded so brightly that it's brighter than any light that had ever shone on this earth by billions of times. And the readings that they found when they opened the tomb, or at least comport with this, that there was a very large, at some point, electromagnetic disturbance that would be in line with these types of UV bursts, and it's still there thousands of years later.
Is that gonna be what happens when we die?
Well, maybe when we're resurrected.
The resurrection of the dead. I think it's something like that.
Big light.
You know what this is reminding me of? I would love to do a study in that same manner of a rock that I saw in Poland near Lichen. And Lichen has like...
Oh, that's a great word.
Yeah, it's Lichen.
Lichen.
But
sounds like a great cookie.
There's a basilica there of Our Lady of Lichen, and it's dedicated to Our Lady of Sorrows. Mm-hmm. And tradition has it that Our Lady appeared in the Napoleonic, war and all that stuff. There was a Polish soldier wounded in the woods, begged Our Lady for help, and she appeared to him standing on top of this rock. And she charged him with, building a church and, having an image painted of her. Mm-hmm. So he did, and now it's like one of the second largest churches in the world. It's a magnificent structure. Wow. If you ever get a chance in Poland to go see it, it is impressive, and their organ is like mind blowing. But anyway, at that rock where she was standing, her feet were burnt into the stone.
Cool.
And you just get this sense of like, whoa, this is really, really powerful.
Yeah, that's like the Church of the Domine Quo Vadis in Rome, where the feet of Jesus are, where Jesus appeared to Peter and said, hey, Peter was skipping town and said, hey, Peter, where are you going? And Peter said, I'm leaving Rome. And Jesus said, well, where are you going, Lord? He's like, I'm going back to Rome to be crucified again. Mm. And Peter felt guilty, and he knew that he had to go back and face his crucifixion. Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see what those electromagnetic, what if that rock has that same type of, signature.
Yeah. Yeah. In the order of grace, though, if we were to just kind of wrap our minds around it, the resurrection would have a lot more power, I think, than
maybe a few more UVs.
Right.
No, I don't think so, because it's the same reality. It's
it's a physical manifestation of heaven. So I don't know if there's gradation in heaven puncturing earth.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it would be that same frequency. It would seem
that would be cool to check out.
It would be cool to check.
I'm just thinking.
All right, guys, let's wrap this show up. Let's just start going to be we'll UV electroscopic scientists.
We'll be like Ghostbusters, with the backpacks and.
Never cross streams.
That would be cool.
So all of a sudden the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man is going to be climbing down Hollywood Boulevard here. So here's another astounding fact. Right?
Give us an astounding fact.
Let's start going through this. So I think we've gotten to some of the really more scientific things. Let's get into some more of the historical things and some of the physical things. So astounding fact. Now, in line with that UV burst and that all that type of science, the image on the Shroud of Turin is so superficial that it defies any way that you can put color on fabric. It is less than 1 fiber thick. It is on the very top surface, and it has no penetration into the cloth. There is no sort of substance that you can color a piece of cloth with that will react that way. It's just impossible. So it's not scorched. It's just there. It's not pigment. It's not paint. It's not
a lot
stain.
like Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Exactly what I'm thinking too.
So it's not like floating, but I mean, it's less than 1 fiber of a hair.
Where Our Lady of Guadalupe is like hovering over the fiber. Right. This is on the fiber, imprinted but very, very superficially.
But there's no pigment.
Yeah, but like it's like the thickness of a cell wall. It's that thin. It's crazy. So that's an astounding fact that says, well, this could not have been painted on because it sinks in. And if you look at the blood on the Shroud of Turin, that actually does sink in and penetrate the fiber even all the way through, which is how a liquid or a pigment on fiber works. So that's an astounding fact.
And the oils too that were used in the burial ritual and the flowers and all of those things.
That's another astounding fact. Yeah.
Because that's also kind of steeped into the fabric as well, right?
Yeah. So when they were researching it, they take tape, right? And they take samples of it. And in the samples of that, they found pollen, right? And all these pollens, now this is pretty cool. These pollens are consistent with plants that would have only grown in Judea.
I love it.
And more than that, these were the kinds of plants that would have been used in first century Jewish burial custom, like that anointing. And we know from the Gospels that Jesus was anointed that way in accordance with Jewish customs. And that would have been flowers and oils. And they found the pollen from those plants on the Shroud of Turin.
Wow.
Additionally, they found pollen that would have only been from the areas of Constantinople, which again kind of follows that provenance that it would have been here, then Constantinople, then France, and then Italy.
Wow.
Now, here's an astounding fact that still with that, within that range of pollen, the crowning of thorns, right? What do you picture when you think of it?
The crowning itself?
The crown itself, the thorns themselves.
I picture it like the passion.
Well, that's exactly what comes to mind is how long those thorns must have been. And I see thorns going into the brow of Christ and meditating on the wounds of, there's a really cool devotion that I prayed for a while, and every now and then I'll break it out, but it's St. Clair's meditation on the wounds of Christ.
Yeah.
Have you ever prayed that?
Yeah, you showed me that.
I love that devotion, man. That devotion's so powerful. But I've actually meditated on the wound of the crown and just imaging those thorns just going through his brow and, his skin just elevated and that type of pain,
So I think
that's what I think of. And I think of like a lot of blood coming down. There's been some renditions in video that, show just like a little bit of blood coming down. But when you think about how they had to get that on his head.
Oh, and the blood, the skin is so thin and there's so much blood in the head that when you get a cut on your head, bleeds like an Irishman,
Yeah.
So, but typically when you see it depicted in art, the actual crown of thorns, it almost looks like interwoven rose vines, right, with thorns. But those are not the kinds of thorny plants that grew in the area. Now, there was a plant called the Gundelia tourneforti, and that's what grows in the area. And it's like almost a weed, like a flowering weed, and it has these very, very long, very sharp thorns on it. And I'll put a picture of this, but this is what it looks like. I'll put a picture of this for everyone to see. Now, it's called the Gundelia tourneforti. Now, this would have been...
Or GT for short.
GT.
We'll just call it GT.
Yeah. So they would have taken, the theory is that they would have taken these, tied them together, and made the crown out of this plant, which only grows in the area around Jerusalem. It's one of those native plants. In looking at that pollen, there was a high concentration in the head and shoulder areas of the image of the Shroud of Turin that had pollen specifically of this plant.
That's possibly one of the most impressive points that you've made so far, at least in my opinion. That's incredible.
That pollen, and then
So
to
what
get
do you
the
think
idea.
they did with that? Did they
Have you ever made
take
like a
the
daisy
pins?
chain? And you just take tie flowers together like with dandelions. We just kind
Are
of.
you seriously asking me that?
I am. You never did that with your kids?
I just
A
picture
daisy chain?
Yeah, you just
He
kinda
used
tie
to
the
do
stuff
that when he
together.
was a teenager.
Shut your mouth.
He did. He was.
Shut your
Delacroix
mouth,
was a
Father.
hippie. No, it's like where you kind of like weave plants together, right?
He's been weaving daisies his whole life.
But
this
if you
Delacroix.
weave that together, if it's a daisy chain, right? You're taking. I'm just man. Listen, hear me out. Dude.
Tell us about your
I'm
daisy
trying to
chain,
make a good
Delacroix. Come
point.
on, make a good point out of the daisy chain.
So what I'm saying is, if you're you have these arrows pretty much that are in this plant, if you weave it around, you're going to need the sharper points to tie up around the edges as you move around. So there must have been some way to,
if you look at the plant,
stick them out.
If you look at the plant, you've got a stalk, and then you've got the thorny area. These areas kind of wrap around the base of the stalk, and then you chain them together, and it makes a crown.
That's a different looking picture.
Well, that's when it is more supple. This is when it's more
of a daisy chain.
But see what I'm saying? So it's very,
according to your expertise on daisy chains, it's more fitting. It's fitting though.
Yeah, but I mean, you can see how that you could take this plant very easily and turn it into a ring. And
I see that now.
Yeah.
I see that now.
So
I think we should show that to the listeners.
Yeah, I'll make sure that I share.
I think that's a very amazing thing.
Thinking about
meditate on that now, like you're just.
I've thought about, Hail King of the Jews, when for Passion Sunday, and I may preach on that this year, but you consider that, man, like that after they place this crown on Christ's head and he's bleeding and the blood is getting in his eyes and he's just like that type of suffering, intense suffering, they're mocking him and saying, Hail King, like they've woven this crown.
Yeah.
It's such a striking.
It's so cruel.
Oh my gosh.
It's so cruel.
But I appreciate that.
I appreciate
Christ.
It's both a mocking crown, but it's also
does that.
Yeah, man.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
to subject himself to that type of crowning in the world.
Right.
And
like
make that crown more precious than any golden crown that anyone has ever worn.
Yeah. I used to wear a lot of Italians growing up when I had the little Christ head, where that was the crown. Crown Jesus, like that was the first chain that I ever had.
Those are like the ones you win at fairs and stuff. Yeah.
No, dude.
Big gold ones.
That was full Guido.
That was
too.
full
It's like
Guido,
you're getting into Guido.
You're in.
Yeah, you're in. Hey, look at
You're
Richard.
a made man.
He's a Guido now.
Yeah, he's got the Christ head on his chest. That was my favorite, man. I love that image. And it is. I mean, it's something that is iconic because it reveals the capacity of our willingness to suffer for the sake of Christ so that we can receive our crowns, and there's crowns of suffering out there, man. Yeah. And that's just absolutely fascinating, though, Shield. Thank you for that point, man.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm just so happy to be here.
Thanks for bringing up daisy chains.
That's
too.
right.
Yeah. And telling everybody how Delacroix is a daisy chain maker.
That's all right, man. Don't be ashamed.
He was trying to keep that private.
I know. That's all right. So here's another thing. Let's move further down the shroud from the head to the eyes. So in Father, I know that you've ministered to a lot of dying people, and there's some physical things that happen when a body dies, and one of the things that happens is that the eyes tend not to want to stay closed, and that's just because that's the elasticity of the eyelid, and then once death hits in, one of the things that, according to Jewish customs of burials, to keep the eyes closed, which was a more dignified thing, is they would weight them down with coins.
Yeah.
Right. So if you take a look at the image of the Shroud of Turin, some researchers will say that there's a very clear image of coins on the eye, which would have been in accordance with the first century Jewish burial customs. But now, when you magnify that a lot, they are pretty confident that they can make out the exact coin that it was. And it was a coin, a Roman coin called a lepton. And a lepton was essentially like a nickel, right? It's not an expensive coin. But they could even make out the markings and compare it with actual historical samples of the lepton. And it was exactly the same as the one printed between the years 27 and 35 that bared the markings of Pontius Pilate. It was the official currency of him in the area. Now, a medieval forger would not know that, have access to leptons, or would even think to so finely and minutely put in words like, in Greek,
In God
Kaiser.
we trust.
Yeah, so you're saying that a 14th century forgery would never be able to, a forger would never be able to know that.
They wouldn't know that. They wouldn't have access to that. And there's no way that they could put in a reverse negative 3D data that when it was put into a reverse would render out a Roman lepton coin with Greek writing saying Tiberius Caesar. Stuff don't do that. They don't do that.
What you talking about, Willis?
That's it,
man.
So, I mean, and we'll put a lot of these images up, but the coins on the eyes are very, very cool. Now, let's move it down a little bit further. I think if you look at all the images of the crucifixion, where do you see that Jesus was crucified? Through the palms, right?
Right.
Now,
But a lot of people are saying it's
but the palms don't have the strength to hold up a body. It ripped the hand in half.
yeah.
You have to put it through these two bones here.
Not there either, because that would a person would bleed out too quickly.
At the wrist, yeah.
Yeah. The Romans were magnificently cruel and magnificently efficient at being torturers. They were. And they knew, because they were the experts on crucifying people. There is a physiological spot that was first really identified scientifically and marked by a French biologist named Destow. And there's a spot between maybe 4 or 5 bones in your hand called Destow's space. It is a small gap between the small hand bones that make up here. And that is the only place in the hand that physiologically could support a body if a nail was driven through it. Destow's space. In the Shroud of Turin, that is exactly where the nail marks are. Not in the hands, not in the wrists, but in Destow's space.
Was that discovered through the Turin, or was it was probably discovered because
it was
there's
through
a lot of
biology,
people-
and they're going through and they're examining
archaeology, stuff like that, just finding.
But literally no forger in the Middle Ages would say, we're putting the wound here. They would have put it here. That's where.
Right. That's where most people would put it.
Right. All right. So here, let's see what else we got. The actual cloth itself, a very distinct weaving pattern. It's called a 3/1 herringbone pattern. And it's like a chevron. It's shaped like this. And it is consistent with the way that textiles were made in first century Judea, but not at all consistent with how textiles were made before or after, especially in Europe. It was not a weaving pattern they used. No medieval forger would have thought to go back 1400 years and analyze early first century Judean textile patterns to make sure that it lined up with a 3/1 herringbone pattern. They just wouldn't do it. So that's, again, that gives that historical credence to the actual customs of the time.
It's kind of like an ancillary, phenomenon.
Yeah.
Just supports, there's just a lot of things that just support it. You get the pollen, you get the weaving, the crochet thing.
Crochet, daisy chaining.
You're like, what else we got? Well, somebody crocheted this in a time where this is how they crocheted it.
So one last thing I want to talk about is in April 1997, the Turin Cathedral caught on fire. And there was a firefighter who was responding. His name was Mario Trematore. And obviously he was Catholic. And he's like, oh no, the Shroud of Turin is going to get destroyed. So the Shroud of Turin is kept behind bulletproof glass, 3 layers, metal cases. I mean, this thing is locked down.
It's a box, right? You said it was a box?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's locked down, and the cathedral's on fire, and he went into Catholic firefighter mode, and he took out his axe and he started smashing through the glass with the axe, bulletproof glass. He was able to get through it. And in his head, he's like, I'm going to destroy the Shroud of Turin. It's either going to get caught on fire or I'm going to axe my way through it. Now, the actual box itself is very heavy, right? And he said in an interview afterwards, he's like, a force in the cloth is the faith of millions of believers, not my own. And I knew I had to save the shroud for them. Before, I was an indifferent Catholic, but that moment changed my life. When I carried away the shroud in the silver case, it became incredibly light, like a newborn child. I felt like the donkey carrying Jesus into Jerusalem.
Oh, beautiful.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. It became miraculously light for him, so he was able to axe through it and carry it out, a huge metal box, and he said it was like a baby, holding a baby.
Wow, man.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, what amazing
I mean,
points.
we could talk for hours and hours on it.
yeah.
Oh, and there's just countless books that have been written about it too, and great research. But this is a good beginning introduction to the Shroud of Turin and some amazing points that you've shared today, Ryan. And to consider again, the amazing power and miraculous grace of Almighty God. And we thank you so much, guys, for joining us on the Catholic Talk Show. Make sure that you're subscribing to us on all of the platforms, CatholicTalkShow.com. We're on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, all of the platforms, and YouTube. So make sure you're giving us some love there. And if you want to support the show and become one of our patrons, you could do that at patreon.com/The Catholic Talk Show. So we really appreciate your generosity, and we thank you for journeying with us. It's fun to just dig into our faith and learn a little bit more about these relics and these traditions, and especially how God has communicated through them throughout the centuries and the miraculous stories that surround them. Most certainly that last story is pretty impressive. But, as we move forward into this next week, let us realize that, hey, we're going to be in our burial cloths one day as well. And, reverencing that burial cloth that Jesus, the firstborn of the dead, resurrected from the tomb and then ascended into heaven, body and soul, he's preparing you for that same reality. So receive some of those electromagnetic graces that come down from heaven, and, get that preparation going for you.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a good episode. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks see you next time.
God bless.